Hello and welcome to my channel. When I first looked at this, I thought, this isn't that interesting. But then as I read along, it just got more interesting and I got more into it. So I thought, well, I'm not going to read it all, but I'm going to go over some of it. And this is about Pamela Werner. And I'm not going to be able to pronounce a lot of the words correctly, so I'm just going to say, forgive me now. But it says she was believed to have been born in 1917. And she would have been about 18, 19 years old when she died, depending on the month. So we have to go through it. So, yeah. Anyway, and the man who adopted her, who her father was the one he found, anyway, I'll read it, and it's pretty gruesome, but so here's this young lady who I'm not even sure how old she was because they're not sure of her birth date. She had been seen by acquaintances just before leaving the skating rink the previous night, and no one was ever charged in her case. So they weren't sure who did it. And there's, different people have different theories, and I'm not going to read it all. You can pause it in different places to read it. Right here it says that something about American dentist Wentworth Prentice as the likely killer, but it goes through different ones, so you don't know who actually did it. But and then it talks about Beijing in the 1930s. So if you want to read that as well, because that's more reading, and it talks about what was going on. So and then this talks about the Werners. And Edward Theodore Chalmers Werner was a New Zealand-born British citizen whose wealthy Prussian father took the family traveling around the world in his own youth. He had returned to England to attend school, and due to his father's death in his teens, Werner had to find employment after finishing and after passing the Foreign Office's cadets exam, and he was sent to Peking to learn Chinese. Like I said, forgive me, I'm going to not be able to pronounce a lot of these words. Anyway, he took readily to the country's language and culture, which he studied avidly while serving the diplomatic service in a variety of positions over the next decades, including one point as a consul. However, his interest in the country where he served was coupled with poor personal skills, and many of his postings were remote locations, meant as punishments to violate disagreements with superiors and sometimes those the consular officers served. He nevertheless married a social prominent woman, Gladys Ravenshaw, and the couple stayed in Peking after his 1914 retirement, where he continued his studies. In 1990, the Werners adopted a 2-year-old girl whom they named Pamela from the orphanage run by Portuguese nuns at the Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception, or South Church in Peking. Pamela's biological parentage was not known, although her fair complexion and gray eyes suggested that she was, like many of the other orphans at the church, offspring of exiled Russian whites. After Gladys died of what was said to have been a drug overdose while being treated for meningitis in 1922, Werner devoted much of his life to Pamela, teaching her Chinese to the point that she was fluent from a very early age. Later, she would emulate her father by traveling around the city on her bicycle, often unaccompanied. Outside the home, Werner wrote books and articles about China, researched the language and its many dialects on long walks around Beijing, and occasionally lectured at Peking University. The Werners lived, like a growing number of foreigners, outside the city's heavily secured legation quarter, a cramped area of about 1 square kilometer that was the only extraterritorial portion in the city in contrast to the more populous treaty ports of Shanghai, and I don't know that word at all. Among their neighbors in the Hutong, where they lived in the modern something or other, or courtyard house, were the Snows. Werner sent Pamela to the private schools that catered to the city's more affluent foreigners. At the end of 1936, Pamela was on holiday from grammar school. In the wake of some incidents, there that that may possibly have involved Sidney Yates, the school's headmaster, making sexual overtures to her. Werner was preparing to send his daughter back to England to continue her education, a move Pamela did not welcome. Werner feared his growing daughter was maintaining too active a social life for a woman her age, and was also worried about some of the young men who had attempted to court her. He had hit one of them, a young Chinese man, with his cane in front of the house during a confrontation. Which would be my first suspect right off the bat, even though the other gentleman had also. So who knows who did it? Right, we've already got two people. We've got Sidney Yates, the school's headmaster, and then we've got the Chinese man that he hit with a cane. So there's two people that could have been the killer already. On the last day of her life, Pamela went to a dental appointment in the morning and then returned home to write letters. And I guess the dentist is also one of the people that might have done it. So there's three people. She left the home in the late afternoon. Ho Ying, a servant, which there's four people, who typically went out to purchase food around 3 p.m. daily, informed her at the time he was doing so and asked her if, as so often was the case, she wanted him to buy sweetmeats. When he did so, she declined, saying she herself would be leaving within the hour. Yeah, I wouldn't suspect him. So we got three suspects so far. We've got that Chinese man and the headmaster and the dentist. So after leaving, Pamela met a friend, a daughter of a Russian whom she had known for 5 years, at the Wagon Lit Hotel, a popular gathering place for the city's foreign community. Per an agreement the two had made the day before, Pamela told her that she had been there earlier and left briefly before returning to meet her. Afterwards, they went back to the Gurevich home, Ethel's home, where Ethel's mother served the two tea, buttered bread, and cake. Pamela ate very little, saying she was not hungry. Pamela and Ethel went out to the ice skating rink operated by a French company. They got there about 6 p.m. They skated with a third friend, Lillian, another Russian. The three remained together for most of the time they were there, except for a brief period when Pamela went to speak to another girl. Around 7:30, Ethel recalled that Pamela said she had to go home for dinner. They asked her if she felt comfortable returning home at night, and she told them she was always went by herself and that nothing can happen to me here in Peking. So they saw her bicycle away with her skates over her shoulder, and that was the last time she was ever seen alive. So by 8 p.m., Pamela still didn't return home, although her father had, and around 10:30, he asked Ho to go to the skating rink to see if she was there, but by the time he arrived, the rink had closed, the workers were cleaning up. They couldn't tell him anything about Pamela because they said there was like 200 people there and they didn't know. So he returned home, and where the man who had adopted her, etc., told him to go home for the night. So, and then he went out with an electric torch hunting for his daughter and trying to find her, and he couldn't find her. So in the morning, shortly after 8 a.m. the next day, two rickshaw pullers near Fox Tower along the city's old walls noticed a group of wild dogs showing interest in a bundle lying, which of course was her body. So they went down to take a closer look, and after finding it was the severely beaten and stabbed body of what appeared to be a young European woman, he ran to the nearest police box a quarter of a mile away to report it. Rickshaw drivers secured the scene, keeping the dogs away and covering the body with bamboo mat to discourage curious onlookers until detectives could arrive. Colonel Shi Chung of the Peking Police supervised the investigation. At first, he presumed the descendant to have been yet another of many Russian whites who, overwhelmed by despair, they had committed suicide. But then they had Christmas in the Russian Orthodox calendar lent some support, but the wounds seemed to be too extensive, so he didn't think it was suicide. And aware that a possible killing of a wealthy foreign woman just outside of the quarter might be of interest to foreign authorities there, even though the Chinese had jurisdiction, he called W.P. Thomas, the legation quarter police commissioner, to the scene. Uncertain over the woman's identity ended when Werner stumbled across the scene a short while later. After resting at his home, he had resumed his search for his daughter in the morning light and left a note about her disappearance with Thomas' office. When he saw the body, he shrieked Pamela and collapsed next to the body. He had apparently recognized the clothing and the jewelry she was wearing. Later, a constable with a foreign legation who also knew Pamela confirmed the identification. By the evening, the crime scene had been secured and processed, and Pamela's body was taken to the medical college to be autopsied. Said there were plenty of deaths to investigate at the time, and each morning several bodies were routinely collected from the streets. Most were suicide or natural causes. Homicides were harder to resolve as they could have been either due to routine criminal activity and disputes or Japanese provocations or increasingly political assassinations carried out by, I don't know what that's called, Kuomintang of its enemy, both internal and external. And forgive me, I don't know how to pronounce all of these words. Anyway, General Song was also having some of the drug dealers he caught executed, particularly if they were not Chinese or Japanese. Both Han and Thomas knew the investigation into Pamela's death would be unusual. While the Chinese had jurisdiction because of where her body had been found, it was entirely likely that it would be necessary to investigate her death by questioning members of the foreign community, some of whom might enjoy diplomatic immunity or at least reside in the legation quarter where the Peking police had no authority. That aspect of the investigation would be better conducted by law enforcement officers who did have jurisdiction. Given Pamela's social standing, the case would likely attract not only attention of the press but also official interest. British diplomats would probably not want to see the case solved in any way that would adversely affect the British image of China. Thomas proposed to Han that the Peking police exercise their right to name the official who would serve as an envoy for the investigation, and suggested that the official be Detective Chief Inspector Richard Dennis, of Scotland Yard veteran who was chief of police in the British concession in Tientsin. He could not be easily pressured by the diplomatic service since he was not under their authority. Han agreed, and the two would work together to try to solve the case. So Pamela's body and where it was found had already yielded some clues. The expensive platinum jewelry that had helped confirm the corpse's identity had not been taken, suggesting robbery was not the motive. Pamela's wristwatch had been stopped shortly after midnight, suggesting that was when she had died. And wouldn't she have been home by midnight if she left? I don't understand. She leaves at 7:30 and she's racing home to go get dinner, but she dies after midnight. So, and there was no blood at the scene other than that on her clothes, suggesting she was killed somewhere else and then dumped there. Wow. Nearby was her membership card for the skating rink with some blood on it. However, her bicycle and skates were never found. So wherever she rode her bicycle to, that's crazy. They never found her bicycle or her skates. That sounds like she might have made it home or wherever she was killed, I guess, right? I guess she made it wherever she was killed. So, but she wasn't killed till midnight? That's crazy. That's like 4.5 hours. So anyway, the autopsy yielded additional information of interest. Pamela had died from a brain hemorrhage caused by several blows to the head, possibly inflicted with a smooth surface piece of wood or stone, blows strong enough to fracture her skull. So somebody was beating her in the head. From the proximity necessary to inflict those blows and the directness, they concluded that she had been killed by somebody that she knew. Somebody just repeatedly hit her in the head. And then it said a similar blunt force trauma injury to the right arm was believed to have been inflicted after death because there was no hemorrhaging around it. Likewise, the low amount of blood released from the stabbings and slashing suggests those two were post mortem. So somebody kept hitting her and they had to kill her, and then after they killed her, they stabbed her to make it look like she had been stabbed to death. They had been inflicted with a knife, likely the two edges of the blade, although possibly not equally sharp, with at least 4 inches long. Within the body, muscles had been severed cleanly. The 2 slits in the abdomen, most of Pamela's internal organs had been removed and her blood drained. The skull required to do this as cleanly and quickly as it had been done suggested to the pathologist that whoever had done so had considerable skill, perhaps that of a surgeon or anatomist. I don't know how to pronounce that word either. Anatomy. Anatomist. There we go. The dogs that had been showing interest in the body could not have inflicted those wounds. Her heart was missing, and the ribs surrounding broken from the inside to do so, a task requiring a considerable amount of force. A knife had also been used to repeatedly penetrate her vagina to the point that it could not be determined whether she was sexually assaulted either before or after she was killed. So she may not have been sexually assaulted or anything. She may have just been beaten to death in her head, and then after that they just wanted to cover up what they had done to make it look like all of this. One of the few internal organs that remained was her stomach. It was found to contain some partially digested Chinese food. Since she had not been known to have eaten anything other than the bread, cake, and tea she had at her friend's house, this, along with the time on her watch stop, suggested she had been alive for several hours after leaving the ice rink. The time of death was placed between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. Right, because it was around midnight, right? So she had eaten dinner. She had went, it seems like she made it home and ate dinner before she was killed. Where did she eat dinner at? If she's going home from the skating rink and somebody grabs her and attacks her and to do whatever they're going to do and kill her, they're not going to stop and have her eat dinner. That doesn't make any sense. And it's late enough to where she could have eaten dinner. What happened? Her skirt was loose, her silk stockings had been torn, and her underwear was missing. However, her overcoat and scarf were still with the body, along with shoes and some other personal effects. This further argued for the killer having taken place elsewhere and the body being dressed afterwards. So they dressed her after they killed her. What the hell? It was concluded that the killing had been sexually motivated. But I don't understand why they would let her eat dinner. That doesn't make sense. According to the gynecologists who participated and the doctors who performed the autopsy, believe that they intended to dismember her after her death, but whoever was doing so wasn't able to complete the task and hastily dumped the body. Hand made sure distribution of the autopsy report was limited, as he did not want the details of the mutilation widely reported in the press, since that would make the case harder to solve. He kept the only copy in his desk. Oh my goodness. I think her dad did it. I think her dad did it. I'm thinking everybody was asleep and she made it home and she was late for dinner and she ate dinner, and I don't know what happened, but it sounds like he did it, doesn't it? Sound like he did it? I don't understand. Han knew that, or somebody in the house, Han knew that as a practical matter, he had 20 days to solve the case, after which his superiors and the press would lose interest in it and other crimes would likely demand his attention. Dennis arrived in Peking by train, preceded by 2 of his subordinates, who would also work with him for a few days. The 2 began their investigations at once. Many leads poured in, most of them false. One, a rickshaw puller who had been seen washing a bloodied seat cushion near where Pamela's body was found, turned out to have been cleaning up the mess from a fight between a Russian and American Marine. Han and Dennis interviewed the friends that Pamela had last seen with. Their stories corroborated each other. Werner himself, though grief-stricken, told them of his last afternoon in his overnight search through the city after Pamela had failed to return. Some others in the foreign community, including many of the British diplomats Werner had clashed with during his career, seemed to think he might have been responsible. He did admit to offers that he confronted a young Chinese man outside the house whom he accused of being too interested in Pamela, breaking the man's nose with his cane, a move he conceded was an overreaction. Werner told Dennis that he was sending Pamela back to England and she didn't want to go, owing to some unspecified incident at the grammar, a development he was surprised the detective was unaware of. In retracing Pamela's steps of the afternoon and the night of the January 7th, the detectives did learn one new piece of information. Between 3 and 4 p.m., Pamela had gone to the concierge at the Wagons Lit Hotel and asked about renting a room, going so far as to check out the hotel's brochure. Why she did, nobody knew. She could have been preparing for a visit by a boy from her class whom she had expressed interest in, or preparing to leave her father's home on a more long-term basis. Although Han would not confirm any reports about the extent to which Pamela's body had been mutilated in his first press conference about the investigation or Dennis's participation, he admitted that the police had no solid leads at that point. 2 days afterwards, speculation filled the gap in reporting. The Fox Tower is long believed to be haunted by evil spirits, and there were some theories that settled on the explanation for the killing. Some expatriates suggest Werner himself might have killed his daughter in a fit of rage. That's what I'm thinking, because she ate dinner and it was so late. While his fits of temper were well known, and indeed had adversely affected his diplomatic career, Dennis ultimately believed he was innocent. Helen Foster Snow, one of the Werner's neighbors, told the detective that it might have been possible that Kuomintang assassins had mistaken Pamela for her. Since the two looked similar, she knew that Chiang's government had not been happy with the things she and her husband Edgar had said about them, especially in contrast with their sympathetic portrayal of the communists. But Dennis considered the assassination theory plausible due to the strong resemblance between Snow and Pamela. In the dark, the two easily could be confused. But the political assassinations carried out by the Blue Shirt Society, I don't know how to pronounce that, and its more elite counterpart, Military Statistics Bureau, were much tidier affair. Their targets were usually shot once in the head and dumped somewhere, not extensively mutilated after their death. Why would somebody extensively mutilate somebody after their death? To make it look like, yeah, that's crazy. Han ordered police to canvass the areas Pamela might have traveled through, particularly the area known as the Badlands just outside the Legation Quarter, a neighborhood of Hutongs where the bars and brothels that served and employed many of the emigres, I don't know how to pronounce that, and refugees in the city were located. Since Pamela's body must have been moved, possibly with a vehicle, he ordered officers to find and check every registered automobile in the Peking area, even though those records had not been kept consistently. A week after the crime, a Russian landlady in the Badlands told police about finding a bloody dagger and cloth in the possession of a tenant of hers. So you're thinking they did it, but no. The male suspect, known as Penfold, was taken into custody by Han's officers and held at headquarters on Morrison Street. Dennis not only attended the interrogation, but actively took part, despite orders given to him in secret to confine his role in the investigation to the Legation Quarter. Penfold, later identified by Canadian diplomats in the city as a deserter from the Canadian Army who had fled first to the U.S., where he had acquired a criminal record, and then to China, where he worked as a bodyguard to one of the warlords for several years before falling into a low-paying job, refused to talk. Despite being held overnight, Penfold would not say anything. He smoked heavily and fidgeted nervously, suggesting he was entering the early stages of withdrawal from the opiate addiction widespread among the city's less affluent foreign population at the time. One officer recognized him as a man he had seen lingering a little longer than other passerbys when he passed the crime scene. piquing detectives' interest further. In his personal effects, they found a business card for an establishment at 27 Chuanbun Hutong, I don't know how to pronounce that either, a bar in the Badlands run by a Russian immigrant that, like many other such businesses in Peking at the time, doubled as a brothel. So they had a lot of brothels, I guess. So Canadian officials indicated he had often been seen at the one next door. So Pamela had the address next door. So Pamela had ordinarily she would avoid the Badlands at night, according to her friends. But since she was in a hurry to get home for dinner, she might have chosen that more direct route, which would have put her passing right by that. But so they raided it, and said the raid received press coverage but yielded no clues. Patrons who had been shown pictures of Pamela did not recognize her as having been there on the night of January 7th, which had been crowded owing to the holiday. However, at 27 Chuanbun, the manager, a former U.S. Marine named Joseph Knauf, knew Penfold and said he worked as a security at the neighboring bar. He also told detectives that Penfold had been present that weekend at nudist gatherings at a cottage in the city's western hills, where participants also hunted in the surrounding woods, although that was becoming more difficult owing to the increasing Japanese presence. Armed with that information, Hans and Dennis returned to the re-interview Penfold, whereupon Dennis informed him that he knew about the nudist gatherings. Penfold admitted that he had been at the events, but only as a security guard. So he claimed not to have known Pamela. He refused to say where the blood on his dagger comes from. So anyway, the blood on his dagger came from an animal. It didn't come from her. That's what they're saying. But that's weird because she was stabbed repeatedly. So I don't know. At this point, Dennis was suddenly recalled to go for a meeting with the British consul there. He was briefed on why Werner had abruptly withdrawn his daughter from Tientsin Grammar. Apparently, Pamela had alleged that the headmaster, Sidney Yeats, who also oversaw the house where she was boarded while school was in session, had made sexual overtures to her. Yeats had agreed to leave his post and return to England at the end of the school year. In the wake of the murder, for which Yeats had an alibi, their departure had been postponed for the following week. Dennis was told to make sure the murder investigation did not result in any public disclosure of his potential scandal as it would be injurious to the British prestige and standing in China at a very difficult time. Werner also caused problems with the British authorities in Peking. They offered a reward of 1,000 Chinese silver dollars, roughly 10 times what the average Chinese family lived on per year at the time, for information that would help solve the case. Werner complained to no avail that the reward flyers should be printed in Chinese as well as English, and the money made available via a bank account so that the successful informant could claim it anonymously. Since many Chinese distrusted any government authorities, whether their own or foreign, he believed that this would make it easier for a local informant to come forward. I'm still wondering where she ate dinner at, because she hadn't eaten and the dinner was in her stomach. So I don't. Back in Peking, Dennis learned from Han that Penfold would have to be released. The pathologist had found the blood on his knife and clothing was an animal, not human, and there was no other evidence he could have been held for. A second pair of keys in his possession had been found to unlock a second residence of his in the legation quarter, meaning the authorities there would have to permit him to face charges, and the British consul, who was also by law presiding over the inquest as coroner, declined to do so, as he did not believe there was sufficient evidence to secure conviction. Nor was he eager to set a precedent that would allow legation quarter residents to answer to Chinese court so easily. After his release, Penfold's whereabouts are unknown, although he is believed to have left Peking. Penfold's arrest did, however, yield new lead. Dennis and Han began focusing on the nudist weekends. Penfold had told them that they were organized by Wentworth Prentice, an American dentist whose patients were mostly wealthy expatriates and diplomats. Prentice had originally settled in China and his wife and children after graduating Harvard Dental School in 1918, but in 1932 she had returned to the U.S. with the children. His file at the U.S. consulate suggested that at least one person there had been concerned for the safety of one of his children, but did not explain why. So, I don't know. So, it was located right next to the ice rink where Pamela had last been seen. When they arrived, Prentice had the windows open because he explained his landlord had decided to repaint the walls despite it being winter time. He said he had never treated Pamela and that he had been at the cinema on the evening she disappeared. So, an Irish reporter known to be strongly sympathetic to the Japanese criticized the authorities for even considering him as a suspect. He vouched for his character and suggested the real killers were Chinese, not Western. When Dennis spoke with Gorman, he learned that he too participated in the nudist weekends. Gorman's wife also told him that night of January 6th, Pamela had visited their house and taken tea with her and her daughter. So she knew them, but she wouldn't have stopped there. She was in a hurry to get home, so I don't know. And this is the conclusion. The investigation just got more complicated. Werner, unhappy with the lack of progress in the case, held a press conference of his own on the steps of the British legation. He decried the lack of information on why Penfold had been released. Drawing on his considerable knowledge of Chinese culture, he noted that there was absolutely no Chinese religious or folk tradition that involved the harvesting of organs, suggesting to him instead that contrary to widespread rumor, his daughter's killers were Western. To the existing reward, he added the offer of 5,000 Chinese gold dollars, most of his life savings, an amount triple to what an average Chinese family at the time could earn in their lifetimes. Werner's actions annoyed authorities enough that they told Dennis and Han not to talk to him anymore, since he was obviously overcome by grief. Contrary to what he had suggested, the authorities considered the killers to likely be one or more of the many sexually frustrated young Chinese men abounding in Peking at the time. See, to me, and you can read more. I don't want to read all of it now. I'm just like, sad, but I don't understand how she ate dinner. So, and I'm going to sit it here for a minute. You can pause the video so you can read that. But it just goes on and it talks about the investigation. And there's more, and it's interesting. But it doesn't get solved. It doesn't get solved. But there's, and I'll scroll down, but there's one person who thinks that they know who did it when you get to the bottom. So, but I don't know. And it says Pamela and her mother were buried in the English cemetery, now under the pavement of the Second Ring Road. But and then it talks about a British writer and business consultant, Paul French, who had moved to China for his work after studying Chinese, came across a footnote in a biography of Helen Foster Snow, briefly discussing her fears in the wake of Pamela's murders that she had been the intended victim, as well as some of the other rumors sweeping Peking's foreign community at the time. French woke up the next morning wanting to know more about the case and eventually felt a responsibility to tell the story in some form. During later research at the National Archives, Rain led him to extend his visit. He looked through a box of 1940 records from the British Embassy in China, wondering if any of them would have anything about the killing. There were many, including a 150-page letter from Werner documenting that his private efforts had uncovered about the case, a letter whose conclusions implicated Prentice and the circle of fellow nudists around him. French accepted as the likeliest resolution because I don't know. So, and French's account was published in 2011 and became a bestseller in many of the countries in which it was published over the next 2 years. And it won an award. So, but then there were critics and things like that. And they talk about his reliability. But, and it also says the receipt for Pamela's dental work is actually dated 6 years earlier than Werner claimed. So, I don't know. I still think her dad might have done it. Isn't that sad? Or somebody at the house, because it seems like she ate dinner. It seems like she ate dinner. Did she go to bed and they kill her while she was asleep? And then drag her body out? Or did she get in a fight in her home? I don't understand. So, and this talks about Abbott theorizes that the murder was committed by a visiting American who had similarly raped, killed, and disemboweled young virgins at home. French never mentions that theory as an alternate. See, oh, that would make sense because then she would be at home. She could have eaten dinner, right? But wouldn't her dad have said she made it home and ate dinner? I don't understand that. That confuses me because anyway, what are your thoughts? And then there's some more because somebody else, as you get further down, and this right here, the mutilation of the body also suggests a possibility of a serial killer, a possibility that cannot be explored since records of crime against Chinese residents at that time are missing, if indeed they were kept at all. So, but I don't know. Two other British diplomats in Peking at the time told historian P.D. Coates several decades later that it was theorized among them that the Japanese, unable to get to Fitzmaurice's wife since she rarely left the heavily guarded legation quarters, settled instead for killing Pamela since she was the daughter of a former British consul who was less secure. As you will know, one of the former diplomats told Coates, by the way of explaining the mutilation, there are traditions of this sort of thing. But I don't know. And then when you get down to the bottom, of course, at the end, right? It says A Death in Peking. In 2018, a second book was published on the Werner murder, A Death in Peking, Who Really Killed Pamela Werner, by British retired police officer Graham Shepherd, published by Earnshaw Books, as well as examining the cases against Prentice, Nauf, I don't know all these names, and revealing the full identity and origin of Penfold. This new account introduced previous unexamined suspects and lead, including British diplomat David John Cohen. It also introduces the previously unreported murder theory as disclosed by Backhouse. He says that Pamela was murdered by a group of Japanese militarists in an act of political revenge for the killing of a Japanese officer by British soldiers in 1936. A Death in Peking concludes that a former Chinese student friend of Pamela, Han Xiaoqing, if I'm pronouncing it right, was more likely the lone offender. He was a student friend of Pamela's, so they think that he did it. So it maybe that's why she was looking at the hotel for the room or whatever. I don't know. Maybe they got into an argument or something, but I don't know. It's interesting that her bike was never found, her skates were never found, and that she had eaten dinner. That's what confuses me. I don't understand the dinner part. But here's some references so that you can, if you go here, you can click on the different ones and you can read it. I can't go to them, some of them, because, if they have ads, it freezes up my video and stuff, or it breaks it up and you can't hear the voice and everything like that. But I think it's interesting. Here she was, this beautiful young lady in 1936, thinking she's perfectly safe. That's what you're young, you feel like you're perfectly safe and nothing's going to happen to you. So she's just going to ride her bike home alone at night. But to me, it seems like she had to have made it home and eaten dinner. So did she see her dad or I don't understand. But, I don't know. So please feel free to leave comments and tell me what your thoughts and your opinions are. Have you heard of this before? Have you read anything more about it? Do you have any information from other sources that you find that are interesting, that give you a different perspective? And what do you think happened to her? You know. Anyway, appreciate my viewers, and don't forget to stop and pray for this young lady so many years ago and her family and everything that they went through. But thank you so much for tuning into my channel, and have a great day. Bye bye.